Hi everyone. Sorry for the delay in starting, and welcome to this webinar on Zerto 4.0. My name is Joshua Stenhouse, and just to give you a little bit of background on myself before we kick off the proceedings, before working for Zerto I was actually an end user where I bought and trialed and installed Zerto and ran it in my own vSphere environment. And then since then I went on to start working for Zerto, where I have since progressed into a technical evangelist role, and so part of my responsibilities is getting the message out there about Zerto 4.0 and explaining the product to everyone on the session today. So just a little bit of an overview in terms of the Zerto plans for Asia Pacific. As you can appreciate, with a startup, you generally start in the easiest region to target first, which is typically the US, and then start expanding out from that. But the one thing we've seen with the Zerto software is that there is no real limit to which country or which vertical we can sell to, because virtualization has spread the world over, and everybody has the same challenges with protecting those virtual machines for BCDR. So Zerto has seen outstanding growth in the Asia Pacific region, and we're investing significantly in dedicated resources for channel, cloud, our DR as a service, our enterprise offering, and we have multiple hires now coming on board for India, China, Japan, with our existing investment already in Australia, where they're covering the whole region. So from a Zerto point of view, it's a very exciting time in Asia Pacific, and you're going to see a lot more from us in the coming years as we grow out the team even bigger and really start to take over the world, and not just the US and Europe, which is what we've pretty much done so far. So I'm sure you're wondering, why are we expanding so fast and what's the reason behind this? And we're certainly going to cover that in this webinar today. So just as a brief agenda, we have an introduction. I'm going to take you through a bit of an overview of the architecture, and then we'll cover the solution and the features. We'll just give you a brief overview of some of the case studies that we have available, and then we'll switch to a demo. So before I get started, just a few little ground rules: that there is the ability to ask questions, and even though I am presenting, feel free to jump in with a question at any point in time, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. So don't feel like you can't jump in at any point in time. If you just bear with me 1 second, I'm just getting a bit of a background noise. 1 second. I think I have a colleague on here. Rachel, is it okay if you just mute your microphone for me? Thank you. There you go. Apologies. I could hear a road. Right, bear with me. So hopefully the audio issues are all fixed, and as I said, any questions, feel free to reach out at any point in time. I'll stop, answer the question, and then continue. So Zerto provides enterprise-class virtual replication BCDR solutions for the data center and the cloud. And with Zerto, we saw that traditional storage-based replication between two enterprise environments was being done in the wrong place. Replication and disaster recovery done at the storage layer was in the wrong place, because you moved to virtualization to realize all the benefits of being software defined, the ability to be agile, to have the best usage of resources, and the flexibility of just doing everything on a virtual machine basis and not on a physical basis. And yet for enterprise disaster recovery, there was no other choice. You just simply had to replicate at the storage array layer in an enterprise environment. And because we saw this was at the wrong place, at Zerto, we moved that replication up into the hypervisor, removing the lock-in at the storage layer, having to match the storage between the sites, and removing the lock-in at the hypervisor. And we did this by releasing the first enterprise-class hypervisor-based replication and recovery automation solution, which gave you the simplicity of just being able to select the virtual machines to protect, and then Zerto handles everything in the background and gives you all the benefits of being software defined, and allows you to fully realize the true promise of virtualization and removing all ties from the hardware. And Zerto's not alone in this quest. I'm sure you've seen a lot of buzz in the industry about pretty much everything being software defined, from your networking, your security, and your firewalls. Zerto is just doing the exact same thing for your enterprise class replication. So Zerto 4.0 is completely virtual aware in that it sees the day-to-day changes that happen in your virtual environment. It's enterprise class in that we will never impact the performance of your protected virtual machines. It's completely software only. There's no physical replication to configure or physical appliances. It's all done using software and virtual appliances. And because it's software based, it means it's both storage agnostic, and now in Zerto 4.0 it's also hypervisor agnostic. And this is a big game changer. Back in 2011, Zerto completely rewrote the rulebook on enterprise level BCDR by moving it into the hypervisor. Now in 2015, we're doing the exact same thing again by removing the lock-in to the hypervisor itself, allowing you to replicate not only between the different storage, but between different hypervisors. And what that means is that now with one software solution, in your private cloud, you can replicate between any storage and any hypervisor, meaning that you can replicate between your two VMware vSphere environments, between two Microsoft Hyper-V environments, which if you look at, for example, the last Gartner study on Microsoft Hyper-V, one key reason it said that was a barrier to adopting Hyper-V in many enterprise environments was the lack of an enterprise class BCDR solution. Zerto has now taken everything that we did in VMware vSphere, the award-winning replication and recovery solution, and we've ported it across to Microsoft Hyper-V. Getting a very quick question from Andy Yick here. It's saying, can I use Zerto to pair up the site with a standalone Hyper-V server without the Microsoft System Center? I think Andy's definitely been reading up on Zerto 4.0 before we've gone through it in the presentation, so I'll definitely come on to that question in the architecture, Andy, rather than up front here. We'll also support in your private cloud replicating cross-hypervisor. So with Zerto 4.0, you can use VMware vSphere in your primary site and utilize maybe some existing Hyper-V licenses in your recovery site to best utilize maybe the Microsoft data center licensing that you've already got. For multiple satellite offices, you can replicate from multiple Hyper-V or VMware sites into a centralized data center over any distance. As long as you've got the IP connection in there and some hypervisors, Zerto can replicate and protect from many sites into one. We have support for hybrid cloud, for DR as a service, intra-cloud, and reverse DR as a service, where you can replicate to any of our 200 Zerto cloud service providers and remove the need for hosting your own DR site altogether. And then finally, we now have support for replicating into public cloud for DR as a service. And this gives you a great way of utilizing AWS as a DR target and having a monthly subscription cost of all your servers and storage running up in the cloud, rather than having to pay for a physical data center. And if you look at all the different options that you now have here, with one piece of software, one skill set, and one interface, you can see that Zerto 4.0 is an absolute game changer. Because of this, we have a growing ecosystem. We now have over 1,000 customers in 27 countries in verticals that you can't even imagine, from big financial institutions down to some large industrial farms, you name it, we've got it. And the reason is that they all have the exact same challenge of protecting virtual machines running in a hypervisor. And all that changes is the size of the environment, not the challenge. Apologies for the slide typo on the slide there. It definitely is now 200. I'll get that updated. But the key thing is that the Zerto Cloud Service Provider Network is constantly growing in every single region. You name a country, if we haven't got a cloud provider there yet, we certainly will do soon. And the beauty with these cloud providers is they give you a DR target that's not your own site, but it's a fully managed service. As you can appreciate with replication into AWS, yes, you can go to a certain level in your Amazon account and have support tickets, etc., but nobody's actually going to sit there and manage your DR site for you. If you want that assurance in a managed DR site with a contract and the SLAs that you might need for your tier 1 workloads, then we definitely recommend considering our Zerto cloud service providers. And then finally, we have over 600 channel partners with which to support and sell the Zerto software. So all of these are trained in supporting and selling the Zerto software solution. So whoever you work with in whatever country, I'm pretty sure we work with them too. In terms of the architecture, I'm now going to give you an overview of the Zerto architecture in a private cloud for VMware, Hyper-V, and also in our new architecture for Amazon Web Services. So here you can see in our private cloud architecture, on the left-hand side in my production site, I have a vCenter, some vSphere hosts, some ESXi hosts, some virtual machines, and in my BCDR site, I have System Center Virtual Machine Manager and some Hyper-V hosts. And to answer your question, Andy, earlier about standalone Hyper-V, unfortunately not. Zerto only supports hosts registered to a System Center or a vCenter. I gather that the licensing in Microsoft Hyper-V, now you license System Center itself, and Virtual Machine Manager is an included module within that, amongst all the other different suites in the System Center that you'll use day-to-day to manage a Microsoft environment. So I don't anticipate it being too much of a problem, but the reason that we need the central management is that is what all of the orchestration and automation commands are registered against when you click to fail over your virtual machines. So the first thing that we install in this environment is our Zerto Virtual Manager, which is our management interface that also integrates into the vCenter or the System Center for the VM level integration. It's installed in minutes. It's a simple Windows service that you install in a Windows VM with 2 vCPUs, 4 gig of RAM, 40 gig of disk space, and a static IP. Install the ZVM, give it a username and password and IP, away you go. I can install it in around 5 minutes. I'm sure some people can do it quicker with some maybe higher level hardware than I have. We then deploy the virtual replication appliances to each hypervisor host that you're replicating from and to in your source and target clusters. The reason that we say each one in a cluster is so that as you move VMs between the hosts, we can continue the replication. But the important thing with this replication appliance is that there's no downtime for this installation and no impact to any existing virtual machines that are running. It's extremely quick. Just give it a few details, click go, and we deploy the OVF appliance, and I'll show you this in the demo later on. Zerto is built for the hypervisor, and we use small scalable replication appliances with 1 vCPU, 3 gig of RAM, 12 gig of disk space. They're extremely small and scalable. And the reason we have 1 per host is that's how the same Zerto software can protect the tiny environments to the extremely large, because we simply scale the number of appliances with the number of hosts in the environment. Quick question we have here on the question board: does Zerto have a snap-in to SRM? So that's VMware Site Recovery Manager. That's a great question. Zerto actually completely replaces Site Recovery Manager. And as I go through, when we get past the architecture and we go into the feature slide, you'll start to see how, because everything you can do in SRM, you can do in Zerto, but 10 times easier. So we have customers all over the world that maybe have SRM already. They've struggled to get it running. They've struggled with the pains of running it for many years. Or we have some accounts where they bought licenses, couldn't even get it installed, and now they're all switching across to Zerto. The replication appliances have built-in WAN compression. With an LZ4 algorithm, typically we see 50% plus compression on any replication traffic. You can throttle the Zerto replication between working hours so it doesn't saturate an entire IP link. And the replication appliances have built-in resiliency to any WAN outages, so it doesn't matter how long the link is down for. We simply reference the most recently changed blocks in an index rather than storing them up, And when the link comes back on, we take a copy of the most recent changes, replicate, insert, and automatically self-heal. But you can be safe in the knowledge that any downtime in the link is not going to impact your production VMs or break Zerto. And then finally, in the recovery site, for point-in-time recovery, we need a recovery site journal as well as the replica VM. This recovery site journal maintains the write order fidelity of all the changes in the protected VMs, and it gives you the ability to rewind back to previous points in time. This, of course, needs space, and the average space required is between 7 and 10%, depending on your SLAs and your workloads. Some may be more, some may be less, but you can liken this to the equivalent of a snapshot reserve at your storage array layer. But with Zerto, the journal is actually a thin VMDK on a per VM basis, allowing you to be extremely flexible in how you configure this journaling, because you can send it to a different data store, you can set maximum size limits, you can set it to auto grow, and the really cool thing is that Zerto will reclaim space back if the data change spikes one week and then goes right down to a couple of gig the next. If there's, for example, 100 gigs sat there free space in a journal, we'll claim that back. So that 10% potential additional space is actually a very conservative figure. In many environments, we see it much, much lower. So that's the Zerto private cloud architecture. I'm sure many of you are wondering how we now work in Amazon Web Services. So in the production site, you have the same installation of a Zerto manager. It can be to a vCenter or a system center. We support both replicating up into AWS. Exactly the same as the on-premise configuration for private cloud. You deploy your replication appliances, and this is where it starts to get a little different. But the interesting thing is that installing Zerto in AWS, in my opinion, is actually easier than on-premise. And the reason is all you need is a VPN connectivity to your VPC in AWS. It can actually be a direct connection. However you want to cook it, you've got to be able to connect from your production site into the Amazon VPC for the replication. You deploy a large EC2 instance, Windows Server 2012 R2, and then you deploy the Zerto Cloud Appliance, which is actually just a Windows installer. And all that does is ask for the security keys to link into the Amazon account, and then utilize EC2, the VPCs, and also the S3 storage, because Zerto will automatically create an S3 storage bucket for storing the replica VMs and the recovery site journals. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, S3 is some extremely cheap storage to use. So the potential cost savings of using AWS as your DR site as opposed to on-premise with our ROI calcs and also Amazon's own ROI calcs, we typically see a 70% cost saving over a 3-year period as opposed to buying and maintaining your own DR site. I have a quick question here from Ralph. Will Zerto be available in the AWS marketplace to enable click and play? Right now, no, but towards the end of the year, we're definitely aiming for the next release of Zerto towards November, December time, planned, definitely to be in the marketplace. I have another question here. Can I copy the VMDK to the DR site by using removable media as the initial replication if there is a slow connection between the sites? So to answer that question, Andy, yes, you certainly can pre-seed with Zerto. You can only pre-seed between Hyper-V, VMware. So for private cloud, you can pre-seed. For DR as a service to a Zerto cloud provider, you can also pre-seed. We don't currently have pre-seeding to AWS because I'm sure you can appreciate knowing where to send a disk to in a public cloud is quite a tricky process. I have a question here from Amy, I believe, and it's, is this for Windows or does it work for any other OS? So for the Zerto Manager and the Zerto Cloud Appliance, the management interface of Zerto, it's a .NET service, so it most definitely has to run in a Windows VM. But for VMs protected by Zerto itself, if it runs in a virtual machine, Zerto can replicate and protect it because our replication doesn't actually care what the VM itself does or has running in it. So hopefully that answers your question one way or another. Any more questions on the architecture just before I move on? Okay, I can't see any, but if you think of some, feel free to jump in and we'll come back. So if you were going to design your ideal BCDR solution for today's software-defined virtualized environments, the first thing you're going to need is enterprise class virtual replication, so you're not tied into the storage or the hypervisor. If you could include continuous data protection and the ability to rewind to points in time every few seconds, the ability to click to automate the disaster recovery or migration process in just minutes, an offsite backup of the data for long-term retention, and a third copy on a separate storage device or a third site, which means that you can always recover no matter what happens to your replicated data. And if you had all this in simplicity, you'd have a pretty complete solution. And there is certainly many different solutions out there today where you could go out and you could implement a different software or hardware-based solution for each of the items that you see here. And if you did that, you would be pretty much covered from a BCDR point of view. But the one thing that you wouldn't have is the simplicity at the bottom. And if we look at all the core components and buckets of features that you see here, Zerto is the only solution in the world today that gives you everything that you see here and maintains the simplicity because it's one simple software solution. So what I'm going to do now is take you through an overview of exactly how Zerto 4.0 delivers each of the feature sets that you can see here, and we'll start with the enterprise class virtual replication. Whether your on-premise site is VMware vSphere or Microsoft Hyper-V, we're doing continuous replication of the block level changes near synchronously, which minimizes the data loss, allows you to meet your SLAs, and gives you a recovery point objective of just seconds. And one important thing on this is that quite often I hear people say, hey, you know, an RPO of seconds, that's great for my tier 1 applications. I don't necessarily need that on my tier 2 or tier 3, for example. And one important thing there is that from a Zerto perspective, if the bandwidth is available and you can maintain the lowest recovery point objective possible, then it actually gives you breathing room to cope with bursts in data change or, you know, for example, somebody upgrading a database, and that might cause a spike in the RPO because you just made a big change over a small link. And yet Zerto will dynamically scale up and down to meet the data requirements and the RPO requirements. So what you could see is that the RPO might increase to half an hour because you've just made 100 gig of change and you only have a 50 meg link. But with the Zerto continuous replication, at no point did we ever breach the SLAs that you defined to the business. So if the bandwidth is available and you can do the continuous replication, irrespective of the workload, we always recommend achieving the lowest RPO possible so you have that buffer for data change. There's no performance impact of this Zerto replication because we're not using any form of snapshots. Therefore, there's no slowdown, and that is why I believe the Zerto replication is enterprise in class. Any enterprise class solution should never impact performance. If you start slowing down the protected virtual machines just to maintain the replication, then that's not an enterprise scalable solution. Zerto will never slow down your protected VM because it never uses snapshots. And an interesting point there is we also don't use the equivalent of snapshots in Microsoft Hyper-V, which you'd call a checkpoint either. Because we're replicating using our virtual replication appliances, the replication is completely storage agnostic. You just simply select the virtual machines to protect, and that means you can replicate from any storage to any storage. And this not only removes the lock-in and the need to buy the exact same storage vendor, make and model between the sites, it also removes the complexity of having to configure and manage the replication on a storage and LUN basis. So not only are you now removing complexity, the next time your next storage refresh comes up, you don't have to be held to ransom and have to buy 2 of the next XYZ array. You can consider one array for production of a certain type and then maybe a less expensive different model in your DR site. I have some fantastic examples of some very big companies that might use the traditional named brand that you would, never get fired for example, and then they might use a new startup storage vendor in their recovery site because they actually get better performance. It's just that, some people are set in their ways and you have to buy a certain brand for production. But with Zerto, you can certainly reuse existing hardware or go with a different vendor for your DR site. It's completely up to you. I have a quick question here. Does the VRA to VRA replication traffic need to be in the same VLAN as the ESXi kernel, or can the VRA traffic be in a different VLAN? From Scott. Good question, Scott. From a Zerto perspective, it will become more clear in the demo, but I can answer that very quickly in that when you deploy a replication appliance, we ask for two pieces of information with regards to networking. One, the IP address, and two, the port group. Which means that if you want to specify a dedicated replication network away from the ESXi management network, you most certainly can. It's completely up to you. You can start with one, change it at a later point in time. It's very, very easy to manage in that regard. The final note on the enterprise class replication between your on-premise sites here is that if you're going from vCenter to Hyper-V or vice versa, we automatically convert the virtual machine on the fly, which is how we replicate between any of the different hypervisors for both migration and disaster recovery. So the really cool thing you can do in Zerto 4.0 is replicate from VMware vSphere to Microsoft Hyper-V, click to migrate and migrate in minutes, and then reutilize the exact same licenses to then protect those virtual machines from Microsoft Hyper-V to Hyper-V. And even if you're a complete VMware shop today, I'm sure you'll appreciate that every couple of years, usually your IT director or whoever's in charge of the finances will come along to IT and say, hey, when are we going to start using Microsoft Hyper-V? And as I'm sure you know, every year Microsoft Hyper-V is gaining and gaining on the feature set in comparison to VMware. So if you look at all the different solutions available, if you were to, for example, go and invest in VMware Site Recovery Manager, then in 3 years' time, if you want to consider switching to Hyper-V, that investment, I can pretty much guarantee, will be completely wasted because it's very unlikely you'll be able to use those SRM licenses to move across and then protect in a Hyper-V environment. That's not the case with Zerto 4.0. You can reuse it and you haven't wasted that investment in your BCDR solution. Now, as you can appreciate, the conversion of VMs, the disks, the settings between different hardware versions, NIC types, etc., is an extremely complicated process. But the one thing you should know is that all the mappings from a Zerto perspective are configurable, and the beauty is that you can test the conversion without actually failing over to see how the process works. And included in the Zerto 4.0 documentation, when we release it at the end of the month, we will include a cross-hypervisor conversion datasheet where you can match up your OS, your NIC type, your disk settings, and we will tell you exactly what's required in the recovery site. What we see in typically larger environments is that as you scale the number of VMs, typically the size of the applications also increases, and what that means is you don't see applications made up of just one VM. You see enterprise applications made up of multiple virtual machines. And in Zerto, we give you the concept of a virtual protection group, which is a complete application protection and recovery unit because it allows you to protect and recover multi-VMs in this consistency grouping. It gives you the ability to specify application level SLAs and priority, so your tier 1 applications can always receive the highest priority in the replication traffic stream, and your tier 2 or tier 3 applications can start to, the RPO can start to increase if the bandwidth becomes constrained, but will always maintain a low RPO on the highest priority replication of applications. You can protect a virtual protection group across multiple hosts, clusters, and storage within the vCenter or System Center. And once you created this protection group, we support all the day-to-day features that you use in virtualization, such as adding, removing, or resizing disks, vMotion, storage vMotion, live migration, storage live migration. Everything you do today, day-to-day, Zerto carries on replicating, no change needed. And just to reiterate a question that we answered earlier, we also support pre-seeding to reduce the initial sync time if that initial sync is a concern. I have a quick question here. Does Zerto create a startable EC2 instance in the AWS VPC, and does it support failback from AWS VPC to private cloud, vSphere or Hyper-V? We'll come on to that as we come on to the failover slide in a little minute, Greg. Thank you. For continuous data protection, you can see with the checkpoint box on the left-hand side, this simply means you can rewind to any point in time using our recovery site journaling, which is simply like a DVR for your virtual environment. This means that we protect against not only a site-wide disaster, but against logical failures such as a virus, a database corruption, or a faulty application upgrade, and you can recover from a few seconds before that logical failure, not have to accept the data loss of going to the last backup or snapshot. We support both crash and application consistency. For Windows servers we have a VSS agent, and for Linux servers we have sample scripts. And the most important point with the continuous data protection in Zerto is that we allow you to recover multi-VM applications to the exact same point in time, so they're not going to be at different timestamps which can break your recovery. For disaster recovery automation, one common question in disaster recovery is, hey, how do I actually fail over? And in Zerto, it is extremely simple, and so simple, I'll actually show you, because all you simply do is log into your recovery site Zerto Manager. We click on the Live Failover button in the bottom right-hand corner. Select which applications you want to recover. It can be all or a subset. We give you some advanced options around the recovery, so you can control exactly what does happen once you click Failover. And once we click on the Start Failover button, in just those few clicks, Zerto is now going to completely automate the recovery process by bringing the virtual machines online in just minutes. We support boot ordering to ensure database VMs come online, for example, in front of web servers. We can automatically change the IP and MAC addresses. You can run custom scripts. And we also have a commit policy feature which allows you to try a point in time, and if that doesn't work, you can roll back out of that and try a different point in time in the journal, giving you an insurance policy when you have to recover. And with this sort of functionality, you can start to see exactly how we replace all the functionality that you see in SRM. We also give you the ability to click to test in an isolated bubble network, and we do this without shutting down in production and with no break in the replication, which means you can do your failover testing in working hours in just minutes. And this, by the way, is a fantastic way of finding out if you're replicating cross-hypervisor or you're replicating up into AWS to benchmark the recovery time and actually evaluate the conversion process, the impact in your applications and virtual machines, and document any manual steps you might need to perform once you have switched between the hypervisors. Because it's so simple to test in Zerto, we don't just see users using this for DR testing. We actually see them using it day to day to simplify the testing of upgrades and patches before applying them to production. And we actually allow you to take full off-site clones of the virtual machines in VMware, Hyper-V, and also in AWS. And a fantastic use case here could be replicating up into AWS and then using Zerto to build test dev copies of your production applications out in AWS and not have to have the hassle of managing them in your BCDR site altogether. For failback, with a single checkbox, we'll automatically reverse the failback configuration, replicating only the changes back to production. And to answer the previous question from Greg, with our current support for AWS, the failback is right now a manual V2V export process. So it's simply converting the virtual machines back to the production site and sending the full data. This is definitely not how Zerto is going to be by the end of the year. On our roadmap for the end of 2015, we will support the exact same single checkbox to reverse the replication back, either to VMware vSphere or Hyper-V. Another question that came up from Greg Sawyer was the recovery in AWS. So when you click to recovery in AWS, Zerto will automatically take all the S3 storage instances of the replica VMs and the journal, and we will then do a disk import, build up the recovery VMs, and then apply the boot ordering. So this, of course, is reliant on the speed of a disk import in AWS. So you'll typically see a recovery time objective between 30 and 60 minutes in AWS. But the benefit of this is that you're also paying for the very, very cheap S3 storage, and you don't have to pay for any running instances with the replication other than the Zerto Cloud Appliance. In Zerto, we also have a feature called Offsite Backup, which allows you to take a backup of the virtual protection group from the replicated data with no impact in production. And you can set this to run daily, weekly, or monthly. And it means that you don't have to manage backup windows in production because there's no break in the protection or the recovery. And we allow you to put that backup on an offsite repository in the same site, a different site, or in public cloud. And it gives you a third copy of the data, which means you can always recover because you've got a portable compressed file that you can restore to any Zerto manager, any vCenter or system center, and protect against the failure in your BCDR site. If you're storing all your replica data on a SAN in your recovery site and you lose that SAN, you've lost your ability to recover and you have no restoration points. You might have to go to some tape if you've got it. With the Zerto Offsite Backup, you have that third copy of the data, and you always have a point in time you can recover to, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is extremely important in any environment. When you've implemented a BCDR solution and you tell the business that they're protected, it's no good if your recovery site storage has a controller failure, dual controller failure, and that also goes down. The different types of repository we support are basically anything you can present to the Zerto manager as a disk target. So it could just be a local disk, an RDM, an SMB share. It could be a dedicated deduplication device such as data domain. And we also support moving the offsite backups into Amazon S3 storage, which you can life cycle to Glacier for the cheapest storage possible. And because you can archive for long periods, this means that you don't just have to use this for a third copy of the data. You can actually start to use this offsite backup for long-term data retention because you can keep this replica backup for as long as you want, and therefore you can start to evaluate this to remove maybe some archive tape system that you still have going. So for simplicity, in Zerto 4.0 we have a new HTML5 tablet-ready interface for consistent management and control across your hypervisors. It doesn't matter which hypervisor you're using underneath, you get the same interface that you see here. You can see the real-time replication data showing you the virtual awareness because it's integrated into the hypervisor, which means it's simple to manage. It gives you dashboards for the protection status and the KPIs, an enterprise-class BCDR control plane with SLAs, alerting, reporting, and DR operations. And you can manage and monitor multiple sites with an additional module that we have, which is what we call a Zerto Cloud Manager. Apologies for my little typo there. So if we look at an infrastructure before Zerto 4.0, you typically have to have one interface and one skill set for managing the replication between the storage array layer, another skill set and interface for managing the integration into the virtual environment for recovery orchestration, a third solution for continuous data protection and the ability to rewind back in time, and then finally you'd have to maintain an offsite backup solution to keep that third copy of the data to ensure that you can always recover no matter what. If we take that exact same environment and we apply Zerto and one software solution, we include all the replication, the recovery orchestration and automation, continuous data protection, and the offsite backup, in one single software solution. And that is why in 2015, if you're running your own data center and you need BCDR for a virtualized environment, there's no other solution you need to look at other than Zerto 4.0. So to summarize the features that we've covered so far, and then we'll switch to a quick demonstration of the new GUI. Zerto gives you enterprise-class disaster recovery software that's hypervisor-based replication and virtual aware for private, hybrid, and public clouds that's both storage and hypervisor agnostic, giving you a recovery point objective of seconds, continuous data protection with recovery down to the nearest second, the ability to click to test, click to failover with a recovery time objective of minutes, offsite backups of the data for long-term retention and to ensure you can always recover. You can install it in minutes, no downtime, simple, scalable software that represents a strategic solution for your organization because you can use it for VMware today and switch to Hyper-V tomorrow. Between any different storage device, it's really up to you. I have a quick question here from Scott, I believe. Any plans to support Azure? Yes, most definitely. I know this has been recorded and I should definitely watch what I say, but we certainly have some proof of concepts running, and it's most definitely on our roadmap for potentially later in the year. So I'm not going to go into any detail on the case studies in the interest of time because I do want to show you a quick demo, but these are some of the case studies that we have, and we'll definitely be sending out some emails after, so I'm sure we'll send you a few of these that are applicable for your region. And without further ado, I'll switch across to a quick demo, and just as I'm logging in, feel free to shoot any questions across. Another quick question here. Can the DR site use local storage? Most definitely yes. I mean, it could even use a USB disk if you really wanted to, although I'm not sure that would meet your I/O requirements, but yes. When I say any storage, I mean any storage, any vendor, any connectivity type. It's completely up to you. I have another question here. Are there any plans to implement third-party backup apps to allow Zerto application-aware Zerto backups? So in terms of the Zerto, the way we do application consistency, we just use a simple checkpointing system which any third-party app that can reference a script to insert a checkpoint can integrate into Zerto. So it's very much up to your application, but we have lots of examples out there. So for the most part, most definitely any third-party software that supports you running a script as part of its application awareness, then you can create that application point in time in Zerto, which I think answers my other question in there. Another quick question here. If our BCDR site is on AWS, can we still perform offsite backups to S3? To answer that question, yes, you definitely can. So now you can all see the new GUI that we have here. Just to give you a quick overview of this new dashboard, we can see that we have all the KPIs and the overall health of my environment, as well as the real-time replication and the amount of WAN traffic going across. But the key thing in the status in the top corner, you can see the total number of virtual protection groups that I have protected, the number of VMs that exist in those protection groups, the total data set protected, the average recovery point objective being achieved, which is showing the data loss of just seconds. In the compression, we can see the real-time compression using the built-in LZ4 compression and the replication appliances. We can see any running active events, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have the ability to click to test and click to failover with our disaster recovery automation. We'll come back to that in a minute, because the first thing I want to show you is deploying the replication appliances, and whether it's deploying these into a vSphere environment or into Microsoft Hyper-V. If I switch across to my Hyper-V site here, then you can see in the top left corner it says San Francisco Hyper-V, but guess what? As I said in the presentation, the interface is exactly the same. So if you learn Zerto for replicating in VMware, then you also know it for replication in Hyper-V, and then replication up into AWS as well. Deploying the replication appliances is an extremely simple task, as I said. You simply click to deploy the virtual replication appliance on the specified host. We ask for a root password, a data store to store the appliance, a port group for the replication traffic, which, as I said, can be dedicated or shared, the VRA RAM for the appliance, which is between 1 and 3 gigabytes. We then simply set a static IP address, click install, and Zerto deploys the OVF appliance in downtime. No maintenance mode required. Done in just minutes. Once you've deployed the replication appliances, you then typically pair your Zerto managers together, and this is done from the Sites tab here, where you can see I have my Boston VMware Zerto manager paired to San Francisco Hyper-V, London VMware, and up into AWS. So from one single solution, I can select to protect my virtual machines to any of the targets that you see here. And that's done by clicking Actions and then Create Protection Group, where I first specify a name and then I select the priority, high, medium or low. And the important thing with this feature is that it allows your tier 1 applications to maintain a low RPO, and then if the bandwidth becomes constrained, as I said earlier, we'll then deprioritize a tier 3 app and its RPO will increase until that bandwidth becomes available. You can set alerts and alarms that if it goes beyond a certain threshold, it will be breaching its SLA, and we will let you know in the form of alerts and alarms and email alerts. On the VM tab here, we simply select the VMs that we want to protect in this protection group, and as I stated, all the VMs that we add here are all recovered in the same consistency grouping to the exact same point in time. We can define the boot order, so you can ensure the DBs come online first, for example. We then select what we want to replicate in terms of the replication target, and here you can see the three options of Hyper-V, AWS, VMware. It really, now in Zerto 4.0, is completely up to you. In this demo here, I'm just going to go to VMware, and you can see a list of all my hosts in the target site. I'm then presented with a list of all the data stores, be it local or shared, presented to that host or cluster. I can then select service profiles, and you can set different profiles for your different tiers of application, where you can configure the alerts, alarms, and the default journal history to keep, which is the time frame which you can go back using our recovery site journal. I can then see all of the disks inside the protected VMs, and you can be extremely granular in how you configure this protection, because you can send different disks to completely different data stores or storage in the target site. From a Zerto perspective, it really doesn't matter. Here you can see the ability to pre-seed from an existing copy of a disk in the target site, and the swap disk feature is really cool because it allows you, for example, if you place a SQL temp DB on a separate disk, to Zerto to do an initial sync, but then not replicate in a subsequent change, saving you up to 50% of your replication traffic. We next select the recovery site network mappings, and these are just the defaults for the entire group. We can change them individually in the next workflow screen. So we select one for failover move, one for test, and then a recovery site folder. Here we see the ability to set the custom scripts to run. We can now see each network adapter inside each protected VM selected. So for on a per NIC basis, if I click here, you can see the ability to specify a different port group, IP and MAC address for both failover move and test, allowing you to test the impact of an IP change in an isolated bubble network. And then here we see the Offsite Backup slide, where you can configure the target repository, the retention period, and the frequency which to run, so you have that built-in ability to always recover. Once we configured the protection group, we click Done, and then Zerto will automatically perform an initial sync in the background and then get into the protected state here, which you see for each of my protection groups. In the recovery point objective column, we can see the data loss of just seconds. 1 second, let me just minimize my taskbar from blocking the screen. So what we typically see is once customers have their applications protected, is the next step is to do a test failover and see what would happen in the event of a disaster, and how the VMs behave, especially as I mentioned when you're going cross-hypervisor and the steps needed to bring them online. So if we click Test Failover, select my applications that I want to test. I click Next, and here we have the checkpoint screen and the ability to select the previous points in time to test Failover to, and you can see, if I just click here, that the increments that you can test Failover to are every few seconds. And this is up to 5 days in the past with these increments every few seconds. I then just click Next, and we see the Start Test Failover button, and if I click this, then what we're going to see is Zerto automatically building the failover tests environments for us on the fly. And in this environment here, I have 2 failover tests running from VMware to VMware, and I also have a failover test running from VMware to Hyper-V. So I'm showing you now the ability to replicate cross-hypervisor within the same hypervisor, click to test, and bring the VMs online in an isolated bubble network in just minutes. Because if I come across to my vSphere web client here, in my target London VMware data center, on the inventory on the left-hand side, we can see I have my CRM app 1 and my SQL Server 1 - testing recovery virtual machines connected to an isolated port group, powered on in the inventory, so I can click on the console, and in the example of my SQL Server, I can then log in to SQL itself. I can check that all the services have started, that the database is consistent, and that everything's working. And because this is just a console in the inventory, there's no reason that you have to just do this yourself. You can certainly farm this out to users and get them to actually do the user acceptance testing for you, because the one thing I know from my experience is, do I know how 50 different applications work and have the ability to verify them in a BCDR capability? Definitely not. I can certainly bring them online in a failover test, but then I would use the vSphere web console to allow users to actually do the DR test for me, which you can see here. And then to show you the really cool thing, if I come across to my remote desktop tab, here in my System Center Virtual Machine Manager, we can see I have a mirror of my Zerto infrastructure. I have a Zerto Manager, I have a Replication appliance, and I also have my VMware vSphere VMs automatically converted and brought up online in a test recovery network, so I can see how the VM behaves going between the hypervisors, log in and check that the recovery works for both disaster recovery and for migration purposes. Because the important thing, that everything that makes Zerto great for DR makes it just as good for migration, because the DR copy is lagging a few seconds behind. You can do the initial sync in the background with no snapshots. You can test the migration before you actually do it. Click to migrate. We have a migrate button which replicates, shuts down, replicates the last few changes, brings online, and brings them online in minutes. So apologies for the very quick demo at the end. It did take quite a lot of time on the presentation. So just in the interest of time, we've got 2 more minutes. Any quick questions just to wrap up? Feel free to type them now. And as I'm waiting for the questions to come in, I'm just going to click to stop the failover test. In Zerto, you can specify the result, add in some notes, and then you can build PDF reports detailing the outcome of that testing to send to auditors, your managers, and the rest of the business. And just out of interest, all of the actions that you've seen today are you can automate them via PowerShell and our REST API, which we have full documentation for on our self-service portal. Quick question from Luke there. Can we demonstrate the recovery reports? Let me have a quick look on my desktop and see if I have an existing one that I exported. Here we go. So here you can see an example recovery report where you can place your own logo in the top left-hand side, and for each protection group you can see who tested it, when it was run, how long it took, the user acceptance, the recovery site settings, and then the detailed recovery steps undertaken by Zerto. So I think we've just run out of time, and apologies if you're just about to type a question, but any further questions I don't answer in the next few seconds, feel free to send me an email. It's joshua@zerto.com. Happy to respond anytime. So a quick question here. Does Zerto 4 now support replication of Hyper-V 2012 R2 to AWS? Most definitely yes. So I can't see any more questions. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. And when Zerto 4.0 is released at the end of this month, the first week in the next, please feel free to download a trial, install it in minutes, because I promise you will be absolutely amazed. And if you haven't already joined the Zerto revolution, you definitely will when you see Zerto 4.0. So thank you very much and have a great day.